Sorry, I don't have a Zoom.
This one, yeah. Not that one. It's this one.
Okay, so the background of this really is that, as we all know, the state and federal governments are aggressively purchasing environmental water. They now own roughly 1,200 gigaliters of water entitlement with different reliabilities, and there's a plan to buy back more. Environmental needs are unlikely to correspond with the reliability profile of the purchased entitlement. So if you were at this morning's talk, Quinton showed a graph where, when we want the water for the environment doesn't necessarily correspond where we want it for irrigation, because, we designed the irrigation entitlement system to provide relatively reliable and steady water supplies, whereas what the environment wants is big drinks and drying up. So we have a question about how will these environmental water holders operate to meet that demand. And they could trade water. So people have talked about buying in high supply years to top up floods and selling in dry years. It might be a way to ease consumptive use shortage and earn water for wet year buying. So there's been some papers that have done things like that. Matt Kirby did one in about 2006 and showed that someone who was counter-cyclically water trading could actually make money and continue to buy more entitlements. They can also carry over water if they carry over rights, and one reason to carry over might be you hold water for critical refuge in years of very high water stress, or maybe hold some over because you think you can get a top-up for a bigger flood the next year. Now, there's been a lot of irrigator and a lot of policy concerns about how this environmental water holder might operate. So from an irrigator perspective, you might be thinking, well, we have this guy and he could exacerbate drought shortages, lead to water price spikes, and potentially holding 1,200 gigaliters or 3,000 or whatever could exercise a lot of market power and extract a lot of rents from us. And so when that's expressed in policy, people like, we were talking to people from the Victorian's Departments of Sustainability and DPI yesterday, and they're concerned that perhaps the rules will be so restrictive in terms of you've got to announce this, have an agreement ahead of time, and when you need the flexibility, you may not have the water when you need it. On the other hand, people like the Commonwealth are thinking, we want to be sure that we give people some certainty about what the economic outcomes might be, so they know that, that they won't be facing adverse circumstances. So what I tried to do was pull together a case study where I looked at the Murray-Darling, and I took something that looks a little bit like the situation in the plan, where I took 30% of water entitlements that were there with the security profile they have, and took them over and gave them to the environmental water holder, and considered if they had the flexibility to buy and sell. And then I said, but also let's tell them not to operate at a profit, because their objective isn't to profit, but it's simply to do what they can for environmental flexibility. And then let's ask the question, how much does that improve the ecological outcomes, and how much does that improve irrigation returns? So the structure of the model is it has a water balance model that sort of has the dynamics of water flowing into the system. So rainfall generates runoff into dams and river reaches, losses occur from evaporation seepage, water is released from the dam, and it's sort of a sequential thing. Water moves down the system, it's diverted or is lost, and then performs the input into the next reach. What I looked at was, okay, the goals expressed in the MDBA plan for the Murray-Darling are in terms of, as the last speaker indicated, you want certain levels of flow on certain frequencies, intervals, okay? And so what I did was I said that the environmental water holder has an objective, which is to achieve that frequency, and as he moves further away from it, okay, so in other words, if you don't get 1 year in 4, then the costs start to increase because the environmental damage starts to increase. That's when red gums die and fish breeding stocks are depleted, etc. And so there's one of those for each of these flow bands, if you like, and that's what their objectives express it. And they did sort of 3 scenarios. The first one is you just have your 30%, and it's released down the river with the same reliability that the original entitlement was. Okay, so there's no flexibility. It just follows the same pattern. And the second one, I said, okay, well, let's allow that person to sell or buy, entitlement. So in 1 year he can say, well, I'll sell some back to irrigators because I can earn some money, and I don't think I need as much for the environment. And with the money from that, I may buy some in another year, right? And I just did this over, so I tried to build this like a dynamic programming model, but I just did it in 2 periods to start, just to sort of see if I can get it going. And I restricted that the net profit over the 2 years would be 0. And I did one model where there's, perfect foresight. You know what's going to happen the next year. Another one where you base it on expected values, and you looked at expectations based on a historic hydrograph. I've got some problems with my graphics, I think. This is going to take a lot of imagination.
Can you use your hands?
What's happened to the graphs here? So I had them on the original.
Do you want to try and light up your...
well, I could...
You don't want to stick.
No, I've got it on my laptop. Is that going to... No, it's going to work.
Why don't we progress?
Okay.
During question time, we might try and throw that up.
Yeah, okay, if we can. Okay, so imagine, if you will, now. Basically, so what this shows is that, no matter how you got it, if you had 30% more water for the environment, that would be much more important than anything that had to do with how you operated it. Well, that's perhaps not too surprising. So in other words, they've got this exponential damage cost curve, and it takes off, especially in the late parts of the drought, because what happens is that you miss the opportunity for the return interval, and you don't get another one for it. But if you've got 30%, then at least at some of those flow bands, you can occasionally get those, and so certain parts of the environment don't die, and the exponential damage curve doesn't take off quite as much. Okay, and I showed that for both the recent drought and for a reworking of the Federation drought if we had the current system and the current diversions in place. Trade impacts most significantly in drought. So same thing, I looked at, now here, there was the recent drought from 2000 to 2008, and also a reworking of the Federation drought, which was 1896 to 1902, again assuming current levels of development, current diversion rules, etc. And what you see is that the trading effects and the benefits of trading are, the model, at least in the model that I had, were greatest in those periods. And the reason for that really is essentially, yeah, there, you can see. Where essentially that, what the environmental water holder did then was he would buy when allocations and potential for e-flows were high and prices were low. And so based on expectations, which is the model that I was showing here, they'd say that, well, look, there's quite low flows this year, and the price is quite high. I should sell part of my entitlement, take the money, put it aside, use it in the next year, and then, if he has perfect foresight, then he knows it'll actually get greater value the next year. And the opposite in the years when there's allocations are low and prices are high. So that's a year that he would then sell his allocation. Okay, and the expected value decisions aren't far off the perfect foresight, as you can also see. So the point here was that, the point was that because you basically are assuming that this is quite a low allocation year, there's a good possibility that it's likely to be better next year, then it makes sense to make the decision. The decision heuristic works pretty well, even without having perfect foresight, as far as I can tell so far. Okay, so really, I mean, so I'm well ahead of time, and I think the graphics may have helped to enrich the discussion. But nonetheless, environmental water holders, they have the motivation to augment supply in low allocation and buy when allocations are relatively high. And so if that was coupled with an objective not to profit, the expected outcome for irrigation could be less opportunity cost if an environmental water holder could trade than if they couldn't. So in other words, contrary to the things that we worry about in policy, that they may exploit the irrigator and they're bad for them, I think the preliminary findings here suggest that it could be even the opposite. Now, I'll come to some sort of caveats about that. And at the same time, the flexibility to buy and sell can improve environmental outcomes. So what I think we've shown is, to some extent, that leaving that flexibility could be both environmentally and economically beneficial if we consider the right mechanisms to manage and handle that. Some of the caveats that we've got to think about when I think further. Okay, refine the environmental impact index. So I built this sort of thing, on my own without a lot of help from ecologists. And one thing it doesn't account for is thresholds. So in other words, that exponential curve takes off and let it restore itself when we have flow again. Well, there's a difference between restoration and conservation. In some cases, if you saved it and got it there soon enough, then the environmental value of increasing flows in future periods would be greater more quickly. In other cases, if it was already dead, then you'd have to restore it. So that isn't really in there. And really, ideally, and this is something that sort of some SIRO people are working on, we'd like to really link those to meaningful ecological response functions like numbers of trees and fish populations. I could examine longer time horizons, and I think that'd be worthwhile. So the current model is current year and 1 year forward, and I may be missing. So one of the things that I'm worried about here is that that general conclusion may be missing part of what the strategy might be in deep drought. So again, I was talking to environmental watering people from Victoria, and they're saying during drought they're thinking really about maintaining refuge, and it may be that there's a motivation to use more water in the dry periods, which means there's more competition between the two sources, and so that's something that should be better considered. And then the final thing, and Iftikhar, who may be in the room, is going to present a paper on Friday that's sort of related to this, is, what we've done here is I've assumed that there's sort of a supply function for irrigators in one period and the next, right? And that's exogenous, and the environmental water holder knows all that, and he's able to exploit the market. But the truth is, they may well learn how to game the system, and so we're building some kind of learning into that model to think about, well, if one party or the other can learn and kind of strategically take advantage of each other, etc., then we may see somewhat different outcomes. And, so, sorry for the lack of graphics.
Thanks, Jim.